Oh, there's so many different shapes and there's so many different like faces that you put together.
Yep.
It's wild.
Numbers of blocks. All right. That's enough about Rubik's Cube is.
Yeah.
That's how you speak. Welcome to Bond Park. I'm Sarah.
I'm Marshall.
I'm Sharan from BiblioTake.
Welcome to Bond Park.
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 This episode of Bond Park is brought to you by Encore Records and its charming owner, Mark Logan.
So charming.
Marshall, what was the first record that you bought at Encore Records?
It would have been in the summer of 1987, and it would have been Neil Young and Crazy Horse, Life.
That's about the time I think I would have been going to Encore. 6th grade, I think, is when Emily Hirth and I started jumping on the One Queen South and heading to the old location on Queen Street to ditch all of our babysitting money and pour it into the local economy.
And I would have been there about 3 times a week for many, many years and missed many high school classes to hang out at Encore Records.
Best record store in town. Find Encore Records at 301 King Street East in Kitchener near the Farmers Market.
And meet their charming owner,
Mark Logan. Is that how we're leaving it?
Yeah. Are you a charity, nonprofit, or Indigenous governing body that needs to modernize or adapt your organization to respond to COVID-19?
The Government of Canada recently launched the Community Services Recovery Fund to support Canadian community service organizations.
Together, Waterloo Region Community Foundation and United Way Waterloo Region Communities have $2.8 million to distribute across Waterloo Region, with additional funding available through Red Cross.
Applications are open until February 21st. Learn more and apply at communityservicesrecoveryfund.ca. You can also call Waterloo Region Community Foundation or United Way for more details. There we go. Sharan Widsten, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We're very excited to get to know you, to talk to you about the important work that you do. If I remember correctly, you reached out to us to come on the show. We had not heard of you yet.
Nobody has heard of us, which is why I'm on this quest to get people to know that we exist.
To get that word out.
Yes. So almost 10 years ago, my husband and I found ourselves in the NICU with our firstborn. And he wasn't early, he was late, and he was really sick. So we were in there and it was touch and go the first few days. And then afterwards, it was kind of like it was kind of like how lockdown felt in March of 2020, where we didn't know when we would get to go home, but we knew we had to be there. And just every day is today the day we get to go home. And in hindsight, I felt like I could have read to him. Meanwhile, at the time, I just felt really helpless because you can't feed your baby, you can't change your baby's diaper, you can't comfort them when they are crying, and you watch this amazing team of healthcare workers do all of those things for you. And when I was in the NICU, I promised a nurse that I would raise money for the NICU down the road. And when the pandemic hit, the time was there, and I thought I should do it. I wish I had read to my baby, and I thought it would be awesome if there were books there for parents to read to their children. The idea of bringing a book from home, though, was antithetical to like the whole way you entered the day, because that would imply like moving in. settling in and you didn't want to. Like every day I would pack our bag.
Or remembering the book even.
Yeah, well, that too. So the idea that I pitched to Grand River Hospital was that we would give a book to every new family that was admitted into the NICU, and behind the scenes, somehow it would be free for them. So folks can go to the website and donate $10. And of that $10, only about $2 goes towards purchasing a book, because I reached out to a Canadian book wholesaler and they gave us an amazing deal on really great children's books. I'm a teacher, so I'm very discerning, and I made sure that they were all different levels, that they reflected the community that would be coming through the NICU, and that they were stories that would grow with the child. So it wasn't just a baby book, that it could grow into a book that they would want to read when they were older. So the remaining funds from that $10 donation would go towards essential infrastructure that keeps the NICU operating. Not a lot of people know this, but the government is always only responsible for the folks, the people who are working in the hospitals. The community is responsible for all of the extras, like the campaign for an MRI machine. We pay for thermometers and stethoscopes. And in the case of my son, oxygen monitors, which the one that he had was quite old. So my husband, who's an engineer, every day we were in there, he's like, this technology is so old. And just by being trapped in the NICU, for lack of a better word, we had a very close view of all of the equipment and how old it was and how much of a need there was. So the remaining $8 from that $10 donation go towards helping the hospital foundation and hospital to purchase things.
So it's a bigger story than just let's put some books in the NICU.
Yeah.
What I find beautiful and wonderful, Sharon, is that you are an educator. And like I said before we started, shaping the young minds of our region. Very important. But you also sit on many boards.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Wow. So I'm on the board of directors for Women's Crisis Services of Waterloo Region. And one of the reasons why I wanted to be on that board was I thought that it would be beneficial to have little libraries at both Anselma House and Haven House. And the staff is receptive. So that's something that I'm still trying to work on. And then the second board that I sit on is Kitchener-Waterloo Field Hockey, the Dragons. I was a former Dragon back in the day, and that sport is incredible. And it's all volunteer run, and the power of sport to create community and a sense of belonging, but also to provide children and youth opportunities beyond. Like one of our players is on a full scholarship in the States, and it's just wonderful to see these players grow and become the best they can be. So that's how I spend the rest of my time, I suppose, when I'm not teaching or asking people for free stuff for BiblioTake.
And BiblioTake, starting that initiative is huge also. We know how much work goes into these things. It's not just a hobby. One question that I kind of dislike, I'm going to say it, one question that I hate people asking me is, how do you do it all? I'm like, I don't know, you just do it.
I don't know. Ask me in a decade if I did it the way I wanted to.
Yeah.
Well, BiblioTake is a passion project.
Yeah.
It is a calling. So the reason I wanted to donate money to the NICU is because when I was in the NICU, I had a C-section after a 3-day labor. So my recovery was a bumpy one. And the only way that I could hold my baby was if I was in this one recliner lazy boy like chair in the NICU. And they only had one chair like that for 20 birth parents to share. And one day I missed my opportunity to hold my child because somebody else was sitting in this chair. And I remember it was brown with colorful polka dots all over it. And I was so happy for that other mom who was cuddling her baby. But then I was so upset for me because I couldn't. So I asked the nurse, like, why don't you just buy more? Like in my postpartum haze, and like money everywhere.
Yes,
She was like, because they're expensive and that's not the priority. And that's when I said, well, someday I will raise a lot of money and then we can buy 19 more and then nobody has to feel like this. By the time I got around to getting BiblioTake to take shape and action, they'd already bought the chairs. So now the chairs are already there.
Great.
So now the money is going towards other very important stuff like bottle warmers and stethoscopes and thermometers. And also part of the funds go towards healthcare worker appreciation. So $1, so 10% of the $10 that is donated goes towards little treats for the nurses. So I had them make me a wish list of what they would like at work that would just help make their days just a little less difficult because they have such difficult jobs. Not only were they taking care of my baby, they were also checking in on me. They were social workers, they were psychologists, and then also they were like giving us parenting advice at the same time. And all the while, they have families at home. So many of the nurses had 2, 3, 4, or 5 children. And it's such a huge job. And they would work 4 on, 4 off. So they would like disappear to like their real life, and then they would come back, and I was just amazed by them. So the wish list that the nurses gave us was they wanted a coffee machine that worked. They wanted a full set of cutlery in their break room, and then they wanted some hooks for their coats.
Oh my gosh, such small requests.
Yes, and like nurses are my favorite kind of person. Bar none. I don't care what anybody says. They're the most magical humans. The pediatricians are a close second, yes, but the nurses were with us all the time. So the money that we raised from our first big wave of donations when they came in went towards getting the coffee machine, the cutlery, and the hooks. And we have a few other things. So I buy prizes or I get them donated. So every month a different nurse will get to draw, and whoever wins gets to pick some prizes. So local companies have donated items just to brighten up their days and give them something to look forward to offset some of the more difficult times, I imagine, that they face as nurses.
Can you take us back to, I think about how there would have been the suspension of time for you where you couldn't touch your baby while getting stronger in that. And I don't know what that looks like exactly. Like if you're not lying in a hospital bed, then where are you situated in the hospital? And what are you supposed to do? I know a little bit about, somebody's having surgery, you go down to the gift shop, into the cafeteria, you go for a walk, you come back. But this is a whole different thing. Can you describe what that feels like?
So the first 3 days, I was in my own hospital room recovering from a C-section. And the C-section alone brought all these feelings of failure. Because when you...
Same, I had two. And I was like, only until recently, I described it as, well, it's not like I had to push them out, or it's not like I gave birth. Like I did, and it was awful, and we both almost died, and that's how these things go. And there is there is a failure component to that. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I had to bring it up.
So there was a bit of a stigma. So when I was pregnant with my first child, completely, you have no idea.
No, you think it's all going to go well.
I watched a few bits of TV/documentaries to prepare myself. I watched the Friends episode where Rachel delivers. I watched the Office episode where Pam delivers.
Both highly realistic birth experiences.
Realistic. Jen's last, or not Jen's, like I know Jennifer Aniston. Rachel's last forever, and then Pam's was like Fast and Furious. And then I also watched the Ricky Lake documentary where
In the bathtub,
where in the United States they commodify giving birth and how they monetize C-section. And at all costs, avoid having a C-section, avoid having an epidural, because XYZ will happen to you and your baby. The best way to do it is a quote unquote natural birth. So having had a C-section, I already felt like a failure because at hour 37, I got an epidural. And then at hour 41, I had to have an emergency C-section.
So like me, doing it naturally would have killed me and the baby.
Yeah, so that's what the nurses told me after. She said, if you weren't here, it would have been game over for both of you. So already that was a very sobering thought to have. But meanwhile, my baby was really sick, so he wasn't out of the woods yet. So I was recovering from a C-section. So I was allowed to be at the hospital with my firstborn. And then when I was able to walk, I was able to visit him. And then when I wasn't by his bedside, my husband was there, and then we kind of switched it up that we would be in my recovery room when we weren't with him. When he was 3 days old, I didn't know this was going to happen. They said, okay, you are going to go home now and your baby's going to stay here. And it did not even compute. It did not even occur to me that that was something that they would do, that could be allowed. So it was, needless to say, it was a lot for me and the poor nurse who had to tell me, because I don't think she was prepared for the onslaught of tears, and I was borderline hysterical.
And rightfully so. There was a feeling after this emergency C-section I had with my oldest daughter, Justina, where even just having her across the room was painful. So it's an animal instinct. I was just talking to somebody about this recently where I needed her scent to be close to me to keep her safe. It's very animal. And to have her even across the room, or for me to walk down the hall like they want you to do, that was painful. So to go home I would have lost my marbles.
I think I did. It was unreal. And then we were there the maximum amount of time that they would let us. So things have changed a lot in the last decade. So we had to go home. So we would leave at 10 p.m. And in the NICU, they time the baby's feedings and changes to 3, 6, 9, and 12. So at home, I would pump at those times. And when we were in the NICU, I would pump at his bedside because he was still in need of a feeding tube in order to get fed, for lack of a better word. And it was awful. And we lived in North Waterloo, and it was one of the worst winters we had ever seen. And I remember my father-in-law would be like ferrying me back and forth, and he was driving so fast, and he would drive over like snow bumps and ice. And every time he did that, like I could feel my incision coming apart just a little bit. It was just awful. I think that made my postpartum recovery in terms of mental health a lot longer and a lot trickier to navigate. And then when you were in the NICU, when the nurses' shifts changed, you had to leave the NICU. So at that time, there was a parents' lounge. So every parent who had a child in the NICU, they had to go into this parents' lounge. There would be like, sometimes there were up to like 22 of us in there. So you bonded with like your cohort of NICU parents. Like I'll run into them in the community and we'll recognize each other and we'll talk to each other and we'll marvel at how our children have grown. So that was a neat, I don't know, like bonus of that in terms of like seeing your grief and apprehension mirrored in somebody else and it being validated immediately, because nobody else knew what to do. Nobody else in my family or friend group had experienced a NICU stay. And my son was the 6th baby born in the span of a year. So there were a lot of babies all at once. So I thought it was going to go like it did for the 5 sets of parents, and it went a little south for us. So we had to leave the NICU. And at the time, it was the 2014 Olympic Games. So sometimes we didn't want to go to the parent lounge, so we would go to the lounge where families wait for babies to be born. And I don't know if you can picture this, like waiting room chairs where like the armrests are soldered on so they don't move. And I just really needed to lie down. And I remember sliding under one of the armrests just because I needed to lie down. And it was Canada playing another country. And then I realized I was trapped in the chairs because I had no ab muscles at all. But that's like a sticking point. Like, I couldn't be with my baby, so then I was trapped in waiting room chairs watching the 2014 Olympic Games. That I don't know if that answers your question. That's how discombobulating this stay was.
Yeah. In fact, when you mentioned the idea of this big game going on, there's something that I find is very disruptive to your own healing process when you're in a space and there's a big TV showing a sport
that you don't really want to watch.
Yeah. It just I know hospitals don't have the ability to create the perfect, carefully crafted environment.
No,
but
I didn't want to do anything though. I just wanted to go home. I just wanted to go home with my baby. If we were at home, I would have been watching that game. Right? Because it's a Team Canada hockey game and most people will watch it. It was just, I didn't like that somebody else was in charge of when I could see my baby, when I could hold my baby, when I could touch my baby. And it wasn't because they were withholding this from me. It was because it was just simply not possible for how sick he was the first few days. And then eventually, gradually, as he got better, we could, but we still had to ask permission. And it was so, it was such a strange way to start parenting. And then when I had my second and everything went smoothly, I didn't know what to do. And the nurse was like, haven't you had a baby before? I was like, no, I did, but yes, I just didn't do any of the stuff for the first few weeks. And I've never had a baby this fall that was in my care. And I kept asking the nurses permission the second and third time around. And they're like, why are you asking us? It's your baby. And that was a strange part. It was my child, but I felt like he didn't truly belong to us for the first little bit.
That's tricky.
Yeah.
Right? And then there's guilt that's associated with that.
Yeah, but the mom guilt continues.
I've got it today. Yeah. I know I'm screwing up today. It is Wednesday. Is it Wednesday? No, it's Tuesday, January the 10th, and I know I've screwed up today thus far.
Oh no, I'm sure you're doing great.
But we're all doing great, but we're also messing up all the time as moms, and we're really giving ourselves a hard time about what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah, and there's so many things to do. It's impossible to do all of them the way we want to.
When it comes to reading to your baby, I fully understand the concept of a mother reading to their baby. I read an article about you where it talked about the father reading to the baby as well. How does that work exactly? I understand like the baby's inside, the mother can hear things, but the father is outside of that space, right?
So the parenting partner reading to the baby in addition to the birth parent is important because it just builds a bond. There's like a voice familiarity. But when it comes to reading, when you're reading to a child, you're modeling engaging in literacy. And if it's a positive experience, you're reinforcing the notion that literacy is a happy place, or it's a skill that you want them to build, but you want them to come upon it naturally. You don't want to force them with it.
Like this is something that we do anyway, together or apart, and we're going to take this time to sit back and relax and enjoy it together.
And I don't know too much about the voice. The thing is when you're growing a baby, that baby hears your voice all the time. And because I'm a teacher, my babies all heard my voice a lot. So I think it's important that the parenting partner also has an opportunity to get in there. So that way, when the baby finally makes its arrival, that other voice isn't strange to them. That's what I think is probably the science behind that. My focus when it comes to literacy is the building the skills and the engaging in it, and how students interact with books and texts, and creating an environment where it's a positive experience for them, and that they would continue to seek out texts, whether it's an audiobook or reading or any other kind of decoding. So that's what I bring to the literacy piece. Mm-hmm. And what most parents don't realize, that there's not a certain age to start. You should start right away, because memories and connections in the brain are starting from the get-go. So having the books in the NICU, it automatically does that. It organically creates that ritual with families and their baby that hopefully they will continue when they get home. Like it's my dream that someday, like a 5-year-old former NICU baby's like, oh, this is the book that we read when we were in the NICU. And then at the time, the first time they read that book with their child, I imagine it's feelings of grief and uncertainty. But 5 years on, now it's this amazing souvenir of a time where their child was so strong and resilient. And as parents, you went through this horrible ordeal, and look at them now. Like that's my hope.
It should be something that, like with all things, being an educator, you will definitely relate to this idea, but the government should be taking care of these types of necessary items, right? It's a necessary item. It's a small thing that is completely affordable, for them to take that initiative and cover. But then at the same time, like, you're doing the government's job by raising money for coat hooks. I mean, could we have a coffee maker? Like these things are so simple.
I feel like I'm doing the government's job in education.
Yeah.
Different podcast.
Well, but we could talk about it.
Yeah. So the books actually, last year, 978 babies went through the NICU. So I had budgeted to buy 1,000 books this year, because it did not occur to me that people would want more than one book, and they did, and that's great. But some folks are there for months at a time, and they don't want to read the same book to their child over and over again. And the thing with these books is, once you take it, it's yours, because the NICU is such a high care setting that we can't be sharing materials of that type. And so for some NICU babies, they've got a small library pile forming by their isolette, which is wonderful. So this year, we're probably going to need close to 5,000 books. And at $2 a book, that's still $10,000. So that could also buy a baby Leo, like that money. So while the books are great and they help with mental health and they give the parents a sense of purpose and something to do, they're not a key item that we need to deliver the life-saving care. So I would like the government just to pay for the stuff, and then that way there's more money for the books. And our hospital foundation does an incredible job. Paul's the CEO, and his team, I'm impressed by them every single day, because their mandate is never ending. And they work so closely with Cambridge and St. Mary's General Hospital. And it's I'm really looking forward to the next 25 years to see the efforts that the seeds that they're planting now and what they're going to turn into. Given the current government, I think that nothing's going to happen in terms of getting more right now. Mm-hmm. It would be nice, but not realistic at the moment.
Yeah. Well, no, I like that honesty. I really do. I wanted to flip over to Marshall for a second, because I'll say reading was a huge part of my time with my kids. This is what you do, right? When you're a parent of little ones. And man, did we read a lot of books, and even some now that we can rehearse by heart. There was a stand-up comedian on the Tonight Show a few weeks ago that I was watching, and she was talking about a book that we read, and that was read to me when I was young, and that we read to the kids, and that me and the girls had a really strong connection with. And it's so obscure, and I want to know if you know this title, but it's Tiki Tiki Tembo. Do you know this book?
No, I don't.
It's like Tiki Tiki Tembo, Nosa Rembo, Terryberry Ruchi, Piperi Pembo is the one son's name, and the other son's name is Chang, and it's all about naming your children these tough names. And it's a fantastic book. But like a comedian on
the Tonight Show brought it up, and immediately my kids are like, "What are you talking about, Tiki Tiki Tembo? Like, this is from years ago. We haven't picked up this book in years and years and years, and it's such a beautiful memory. They really stick with you." But because I was talking about Marshall, I'm gonna segue over here. Marshall was a stay-at-home parent for his kids, and like, tell us about that reading process for you, because it's not necessarily those, like it's not the same story, right? We weren't in the NICU. You guys came home with healthy babies. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, I think most vivid for me is I had a huge library of Sesame Street books from my childhood. Yeah. So I grew up with 1970s Sesame Street. And I've always, and Sarah's a big Sesame Street fan, and we've talked about how those are some of the most lovely characters, like those Muppets, right? Grover, Kermit, Big Bird, right?
Elmo.
Yep. And just how I remember just the joy I felt sitting in like Victoria Park or something with Mason or Sully and reading the Sesame Street that I loved so much. And I felt like it was capturing them as well. And then playing with Sesame Street characters, and then we would watch Sesame Street on TV. So that's what's most vivid to me. But I was going to ask you a teacher question, a teacher parent question. Did I answer your question?
You did. That's all I wanted to know. What did that look like for you?
I was talking to a teacher recently who said, so my family needs to take a bit of time to kind of focus in on our kids. There's some behavioral problems that we need to really put some time into. And I didn't say this to the teacher, but I thought, you've been a teacher for many, many years of this kind of age group. Haven't you seen all these things before? Like, you know what to do, right? I think sometimes we think that the people who work in a certain field, just like if a doctor was to get cancer,
You're like, how did this happen?
like you think, well, they already know what to do. They're familiar with all these words. They know how things play out and well or not well, and they're better equipped to handle the cancer than the rest of us. I think I had this idea that teachers, that when something's not going right in the home with the kids, they've seen it all before. So why wouldn't they be able to just apply whatever they handle at school to their home life and get to work?
Okay, so I teach where my children go to school, and I actually teach 2 of them.
Oh man, that's fun. Let's hear more about that.
We can talk about that later too, yeah. So the first thing is you have a completely different relationship with your students than you do with your own children. There's a different level of like personal investment and long-term vision. So like with your students, you want to get them to the school year, you want them to have the tools and the confidence to grow and then go off into the next year, where the teacher will then take that baton and they will continue the relay that is elementary school education. With your own children, there's also all of these emotions that are involved. And then you're also like in most cases, you have a partner who may not align with you perfectly in terms of how they want to approach the situation. So that makes it tricky.
And then toss in some life maintenance.
Yes. And then in a classroom, there's like, I have 30 kids in one of my classrooms. So you don't have the time and the attention that you would want to have in terms of how you would approach certain behaviors. It's tricky because I've been teaching this is my 13th year now. And I can honestly tell you, it doesn't make me that much more equipped to deal with my own children's behaviors, because at the end of the day, all children are individuals and each child needs a different approach. So while yes, I've seen all kinds of behaviors and I see those mirrored in my own children sometimes, each child has a different map for how you can connect with them and how you can help them be successful. Something that worked with student A isn't going to work with student B, because student B has a different history, has a different lived experience, has a different set of expectations from school, has a different support system. So it's not the same. Yeah. So I can understand what that teacher is going through. If anything, it makes you a little more critical of yourself, because you think, oh, I should be able to do this because I do it so well in the classroom. I have way more patience in the classroom than I do at home. And I don't know why.
And we haven't even talked about code switching, right? Like, so like who the children are in the classroom isn't necessarily who they are at home. Absolutely. And the same for the teacher. Yeah. Parent relationship. Sorry, Marshall, you were about to say something.
It's good. I was in a theater a while back with a lot of people I know, and it was, it's friends and family and strangers and other people's kids. And teachers were in this theater. And there's one kid who was really having a lot of trouble just watching the movie, right? And
As they do.
Yes, they do, yeah. So the one friend who doesn't have any kids, we talked about that afterwards, and I could tell didn't have any compassion for that parent and was wondering why the parent didn't get out of the theater, right?
Yeah.
There was me who, I have been around elementary school kids quite a bit, and I recognized what I was seeing, and I thought that must be very challenging for the parent, right? And for the kid, right? And but recognized it's probably pretty annoying to everybody else, right? And then there's the teachers who were in that group who I thought to myself, I wonder if they're even fazed by it. You know what I mean? If they just, you know what I mean? If you go to a restaurant and you see a kid doing something that's maybe not suited to that restaurant, and you know what that is, you've seen it, and you go, that's that, and it doesn't faze you.
Yeah, well, what I've learned is you have to meet the students where they are, and every single student is doing the best they can. They want to be the best version of themselves, and every parent is sending you their very best kid and the person who they love more than anything in the world. So you have to remember that. That's always in the background.
They're not starting that day being like, let's F up this teacher's life today.
And it is truly a joy when you see them unlock new knowledge or realize that they could do more than they thought they could do. So as a teacher, you're just basically reminding them that they are capable of great things and also how to multiply. Like, right, you throw that in, and if a student is having a positive time, if they feel safe in your classroom, then you've done your job. Right? The learning will come if you create an atmosphere where they believe that they believe in their own potential, and they recognize that you see it in them too. And there are certain environments that just aren't appropriate for students to be their best selves. Like for that student in question, maybe loud noises, or maybe there was a smell that was triggering them, or maybe they're afraid of the dark, or maybe they are hungry. There's all of this stuff that's going on behind the scenes. I think about when you're having a bad day, right? Things that don't often faze you, like a series of red lights, all of a sudden is the end of the world, right? So on any given day, one of those students is having a day like that. And for a teacher, every day somebody's having a day like that, and you have 30 students in your class. So it does faze teachers because, like, we're humans, and it's upsetting to see somebody in your classroom be upset. But on the other hand, you can't take it on and carry it with you because that's a lot.
It's funny, you know, like when you said hungry or thirsty or whatever, and I remember that with my kids. If we at the grocery store running errands, the first thing that you address is they're probably thirsty, because I know I am, and I can put it off and have another coffee when I get home or whatever, you know, the things that you do. Or 2 days later, you realize they were getting sick. Oh, now I remember why this thing happened. Or like the one time my oldest daughter melted down in a grocery store. It's just like, well, this cart of groceries is staying right here. We're going home because this is something that I don't know how to handle right now. Off we go into the car and go home. But like on those days, they started out great, you know, and we didn't plan for them to go wrong those days.
Yeah.
That's all I'm at.
And for us, when our oldest has days where he's particularly challenging, my husband and I often remind each other of his time in the NICU where he had to wear a CPAP machine to help him breathe the day he was born. And he kept ripping it off, not even a full day old. And then they had to figure something else out. And then we remembered that it was this energy and this drive and like sense of self that propelled him to get better as quickly as he did. And it's that same way of being that is now manifesting as I'm going to read until 3 a.m. because I need to finish this book, whether or not he has school the next morning. So we try to remember that.
When you have a baby that's so vulnerable at the beginning, is there this moment where a doctor says to you, okay, you're out of the woods? You know what I mean? Like,
bye, go home.
Well, no, but I mean, is there some reassurance? Is there somebody who eventually tells you and says, this is looking great, just stay the course now? And
so that did happen, yeah. So at the first, when he was 2 days old, one of the nurses, I kept asking her, when are we going home? Like, when are we going home? I asked that for the first 3 days, just nonstop. And she pulled me aside and she said, you go home when you get to go home. And then I noticed that the location of my baby's isolette was like in this like prime spot where there's so many eyes on it. I was like, wow, do all the newest babies get this spot? She said, no, the sickest baby gets this spot. Your child is very sick, so we need as many eyes on the baby as possible. And there was one nurse responsible for 2 babies in this section of the NICU. So that was the first time where I kind of understood like the gravity of it, because we hadn't gone home yet. And because I was still at the hospital, it was still in this like in-between stage. And because I had never had a baby before, this is just what having a baby was like. This was normal for my husband and I, because this is just the way it was. And then when he was about a week old, he got pneumonia. And I remember thinking, that sounds scary for a grown-up. Like, what does it mean for an infant? And they said, yep, sometimes this happens. And then again, I was like, well, when do we get to go home? What are we going to do? And then around the 9-day mark, they told us that he was doing great and he would get to go home in the next week or so, as long as he passed his oxygen test. So that's where they put the baby in a car seat and they see if they can maintain a certain level of oxygen saturation for an hour. And when a baby is in a car seat, the way their body is makes
very crunched up.
Or it makes it a little more difficult to breathe in, which is why you're not supposed to let your baby sleep in a car seat. Like back in the day, you could just leave your baby in the bucket and just let them sleep because you shouldn't mess with a sleeping baby. But now they're saying, take them out of the bucket.
Oops.
Yeah, exactly. And he kept failing the car seat test. So we knew we could go home if he passed the test. So it was like this in between. And we were actually discharged from the NICU and sent to the pediatric ward. So we spent some time in the pediatric ward as well. There's so many nurses. And because they change so often, sometimes what would happen is one nurse thought that another nurse had told us something. So our being able to hold our baby was delayed because one of the nurses just assumed that the other nurse had let us hold him during the 3 p.m. feed. And then when she got there for the 9 p.m. feed, she's like, you haven't held your baby yet. Would you like to? Yes. So yeah, it's they do a really good job of reassuring you, but they just can't tell you when. It was very similar to like COVID. Like when we would Google, when is COVID over? Like there's no answer. You can't predict when a baby is going to be able to, like they can't give you an ETA for the most part.
You've spoken so highly about nurses. I think about nurses along with firefighters and police, and I'm always amazed when you meet someone who comes out of that career and they seem steady and strong. I don't know how all that accumulated trauma that they've seen doesn't somehow just, even if you don't see it along the way, just breaks them right down to a point where when they hit 40, 50, right? Just, they just are not equipped with everything they've seen, or not even being able to process everything, all the bad parts, despite all the amazing, beautiful moments, all the parts that, do you think about the nurses that way?
Can we put a pin in it while we say hi to Justina? Because she's going to be making noise. This is Justina, the baby that almost killed me.
Hey, come make an appearance and share your memories.
Yeah.
So is this your older?
This is my oldest daughter, Justina. You're 17. She's driving a car and I know. She's got a job. She's a lifeguard. So you were talking about the trauma and the weight that nurses.
I can tell you, you've given so much thought to the nurses and to and you have so much appreciation for them. But I was asking if you think about the fact that it's amazing they come out of those careers okay, because how can you not be affected by the bad days?
And I guess okay is subjective. And I imagine that going into a career, you have to have a certain mind frame, that you have to understand that with this career will come X, Y, and Z. And the hope, I imagine, is that the good and the positive moments will outweigh those heavy moments and those moments of grief that you share with whoever you are supporting. I have friends who are police officers, and they actually have training to help them remain somewhat distant from who they're interacting with so that they don't absorb all of the emotions and the pain that comes with it, because the compassion fatigue alone, I imagine, would be a great weight to bear. And in terms of nursing, it's such a selfless profession in terms of how much you support the patients and the pediatricians as well. Like the pediatrician who saved my son's life, my midwife later told me that her fast acting is why my son is here. And I remember running into her at Winners when he was 4 years old, and I burst into tears. And I just seeing her again, this huge rush of gratitude, but also kind of like, you know how you see people react like the Beatles in archived footage? That is how I revere this doctor. And then when my youngest needed a pediatrician, I requested the same doctor. I was like, well, because we have a great track record with her, and she was lovely, and they work together so well. And I think that I imagine for firefighters and police officers, it's a different level of trauma. Police officers specifically, because the scope of their work leaves very little room for positive things to take place. So I think they probably come out of it a little with a little more weight than nurses and doctors. Mind you, one of my really close friends, she lost a baby while she was in the NICU, and the nurses helped ease the pain of losing a child and going through that grief. And she is still very close with her NICU nurses. And to watch parents lose young children at work repeatedly, I imagine has an impact on you. But I wonder if perhaps it helps them with their own lives in terms of perspective, with their own families on their 4 days off, just like a heightened sense of gratitude and understanding what a gift it is to have a healthy child and to have your child at home with you.
Sharon, let's remind people about this important initiative, BiblioTake, and how they can help.
Okay, so you can get more information and donate at bibliotake.ca, and that will take you to the Grand River Hospital Foundation's website. So we are an initiative that is branched off of the foundation, and you can donate $10 to donate one book, $50 to donate 3, or $100 to donate a dozen. And you can also follow us at BiblioTake GRHF on Instagram. And we are also working on a spring initiative where we're going to do spring gift boxes, and we have been reaching out to local businesses. And so far we have more than $100 worth of donated goods, and we'll be selling the boxes for $100, and there's 30 of them. So that will hopefully be $3,000 that'll go directly to buying books. So if you're a small business, or if you know a small business owner who would like to give back, you could donate a monetary amount, or if you have a product that you would like to put in the gift boxes, we would appreciate it. I spend all of my time cold calling and emailing local businesses. It's important to me to start local, and I've been reaching out to female-owned businesses. Can I mention them really quickly?
Of course you can.
Kelly Brooks from Pretty by Her, she actually collaborated on a candle line with us. So there's 3 candles that you can buy in her in-person shop or online. And the one is You BiblioTake the Cake, which smells like cake. Just One More Chapter, which smells like espresso. And then her candles are sassy. So the third one is Fuck Off, I'm Reading. And it smells like Zen vibes, and they're just delightful. And then all of the proceeds are donated. So she just donated $1,000 over the holidays to help us with this initiative. And who else have we donations from? Stacy Keller. She is the CEO and founder of Ponyback Hats, and she was just on Dragon's Den, and I won't reveal how it went. And she's incredible. So she donated 30 hats for the gift boxes as well. And Vincent's Motorsports are engraving some Yetis for us. So it's going to be a great gift box, and just the community reception and the support and the positive vibes has meant so much. And the most humbling part of this entire experience has been when former NICU parents message me on Instagram, or they email me and they share their story with me, and they trust me with their experiences and thank us for the work that we're doing. That has been a true joy. So I'm really grateful that I'm able to do this. I'm very lucky.
Bond Park is made possible with the support of the Waterloo Region Community Foundation, the Kitchener Public Library, our local sponsors, and you, our loyal listeners.
We make this show in Sarah's kitchen. If you like it, please rate and subscribe.
That helps us get the word out to more listeners.
The Bond Park theme song is by Alan Lung. Sarah and I are super excited for season 4 and all the amazing shows we're going to bring you.
We're also really excited about our secret side podcast called An Unscripted Spectacle, Wrestling with Wrestling. And it's not actually about wrestling.
No, it isn't. It's about a lot of things.
Mostly life.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of laughter.
Yeah, there's tons and tons of laughter.
We're incredibly proud of it. So please check it out on all your streaming platforms. An unscripted, I can't say it. Can you say it?
An Unscripted Spectacle, Wrestling with Wrestling. Meow, 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 meow.